The day the umbrellas opened, the rain came without warning over Karachi, and the city that had learned to live through noise and chaos now sat under the uneasy silence of orbiting ships that burned like silver eyes in the sky. Commander Eris of the Cadran Expeditionary Fleet watched from his cruiser as the human world rotated below him, dotted with blue lights and rising smoke. He had taken worlds before, but none so crowded with movement, none that refused to sit still, even under fear. The humans had been ordered to remain indoors while the targeting grid sorted heat shapes and signal trails. Yet as the minutes passed, his sensors began to shimmer and dance, as if the whole city had become a lake in wind down on Earth. Nora Park had not slept for 2 nights. She had spent them running between shelters, hospitals, and broken communication lines. She was a disaster planner by training. Not a soldier, but soldiers were gone now, and people still needed someone who could keep their heads from breaking. She had just reached the rooftop of an old apartment block when she saw it first. A woman across the street opening a bright yellow umbrella, though the rain was thin, and then another man on the corner unfolding a blue one with silver dots and then hundreds more. The sight looked foolish, colorful, beautiful, like a festival in the wrong season. The message that had spread through old phones and broken codes was simple. Open them all now. Javed Khan, a street mechanic who could fix anything that had wheels, was under a balcony trying to make an engine run without chips when he saw the crowd moving umbrellas rising like a sudden bloom. He laughed at the madness of it, then heard the buzz of the alien patrol drone passing above and saw its beam shiver, scatter, and miss its mark. The shiny umbrellas mirrored and bent the light, their stickers and foil covers reflecting every direction like a storm of mirrors. The drone fired again, missed again, and spun away in orbit. Eris blinked at his screens. The targeting data that had been clean and crisp turned into chaos. Optical locks failed, rangefinders read hundreds of false echoes. He ordered recalibration, but the noise multiplied. His second officer hissed in disbelief. "Sir, they are using toys against us." Eris frowned, a deep tremor in his voice. "Toys that break our aim are not toys." He watched as the weapon arcs he had aligned for demonstration cut harmlessly through air and sea, missing every vital point. The world below began to pulse with shifting light. Every balcony, every street, every roof now glittered like fish scales as millions of umbrellas opened in a storm of color. Some had foil taped to their tops. Others had cooking pans or candy wrappers tied to ribs. Children waved them. Adults spun them, and whole markets seemed to breathe under a living canopy of noise. It was clumsy, untrained, ridiculous, but it worked. The alien optical system depended on stable reflection, and humans had made the surface unstable. Nora looked at the sky where a thin beam of white light burned downward. She saw it swing and waver, missing the block by half a kilometer. Her heart pounded, not in terror but in fierce disbelief. The stupid plan had worked somehow. The crowd around her cheered, wet faces shining under neon reflections. Javed drove an old pickup through flooded streets, shouting to everyone to keep their umbrellas high, to keep moving, to shine. Aris stared at the readings for a long time before whispering, to himself as if the stars might hear. "Humanity is using the stupidest weapon I have ever seen." And yet the targeting systems of the fleet continued to fail, and on Earth, the people who had once hidden in fear now walked out into the rain, laughing at the absurd sky. The day the umbrellas opened became the day the occupation faltered, not by strength or technology, but by the refusal of a species to stop trying, even when all they had left were their hands, their courage, and the cheapest umbrellas they could find. The joke that is not a joke, Commander. Eris stared at the sea of umbrellas from orbit, unable to understand how this strange, primitive gesture had disrupted the precision of his fleet. His officers whispered among themselves, using words like madness and chaos and miracle, as if they could not choose which one fit the human species better. The humans did not have proper defenses, no coordinated armies, no planetary shields, yet their stubborn resistance made every beam and missile slip from its target, the alien data logs filled with static and wrong readings. It was like trying to aim through fog that moved with purpose. Down below, Nora Park worked without rest. The first success of the umbrellas had bought them a few hours of peace. But now the drones were learning faster. Each pass came lower, closer, their engines shrieking through the air. The people needed to move. They could not just stand in open streets and hope luck stayed on their side. So Nora began to organize. The chaos, she drew quick maps on wet walls using charcoal and broken glass marking where people should move when the sirens wailed. She told them to think like water. Never stop. Never stay still. She turned hand gestures into signals for turn stop, and her calm voice cut through the noise and people listened because in a city where nothing made sense anymore, she still sounded certain. Javed Khan, meanwhile, turned his little workshop into a factory of nonsense. He took apart toys, radios, ceiling fans and built reflectors out of old soda cans and picture frames. He tied them to the ends of kites made from laundry plastic and cheap bamboo sticks. He taught children to fly them from rooftops, and when the wind caught, the sky filled with flashing mirrors, each reflection bouncing sunlight and radar pings into different directions. The aliens saw 1,000 false heat spots dancing above the harbor, and their targeting grids began to scream with error. Codes Eris tried to adjust. The system he ordered his science officers to switch to acoustic mapping, then to thermal layers, then to lightless sonar. But every time a new countermeasure went online, the humans had already made something new to confuse it. His patience cracked. These were supposed to be lesser beings. Fragile, divided, disorganized, yet somehow they used every scrap of junk, every childish idea, every street trick to twist his superior technology into blindness. He called them fools. And yet a quiet voice in his mind whispered, perhaps this is what makes them dangerous. In the city, the people had turned survival into rhythm. The streets pulsed with movement, umbrellas shifting with each gust, kites dancing above and in between those flashes. Human coordination grew tighter and faster without central command. It was like instinct carrying them through every hour. Lena, the teenage runner, darted through alleys carrying memory cards from one safe house to another. The networks were down, so humans became the network. She was small, fast, fearless, and whenever she passed soldiers or drones, she would flip her umbrella backward, making the reflective stickers blind any watching eye. The aliens mocked the humans on their internal channels, calling the umbrellas and kites the stupidest weapons they had ever seen. But the laughter began to fade when entire districts vanished from the scanners and missiles detonated into empty streets. Eris realized that jokes could be sharp blades when wielded by those who refused to surrender. He sent more drones and heavier weapons, but each strike met the same confusion. Nora stood on the roof of an old school watching as a dark shape of a drone squad descended. She could hear the hum of the engines like angry bees. Then she gave one signal and the children below lifted umbrellas of silver, red, blue, and green, forming a spinning sea of motion. The drone's aim drifted, lost. The beam cut through air and hit nothing but empty rain. The building survived. The cheers that followed rose through the wet wind and carried far enough that even Aris heard the echoes through his ship's sensors. For the first time since his campaign began, he felt something he had never known from humans before. Not fear, not pity, but the heavy pulse of uncertainty. He realized they were not a species of logic or rules. They were a storm of emotion and improvisation, each one learning from the next, each mistake becoming a new weapon. Night fell on Karachi, and still the umbrellas opened in defiance, glowing under broken streetlights, dripping water like tiny suns. Nora looked over the city and whispered to Javed, who stood beside her, "We can make this work. They call it foolish, but every hour we live is proof that foolish things can save the world." Javed nodded, wiping rain from his eyes, and pointed upward where a kite string glowed in lightning light. "If they think we are fools," he said softly, "then let them keep thinking it." Above the clouds, Aris turned away from his screen, his mandibles tightening around a growl. This world would not fall easily, and deep inside he began to fear that the real weapon humanity used was not the umbrellas or kites or mirrors, but the endless refusal to act like conquered beings. The joke that was not a joke had become a lesson written across the sky, and he was beginning to learn it the hard way. The first cost. The city had survived another day, and for the first time since the invasion, people dared to laugh. The laughter was raw, a little shaky, but real. It echoed through the narrow streets and through broken windows like a heartbeat returning after a long pause, yet beneath the laughter everyone knew that the aliens would not stay blind forever. Commander Eris was too intelligent, too disciplined to let humiliation last for long. In the great ship above Earth, he studied the patterns of chaos that humans had made. He saw umbrellas moving like flocks of birds, kites drifting like schools of fish, and mirror flashes dancing like stars. and though his soldiers mocked, he did not laugh. He told them these humans fight with nonsense because nonsense is infinite. Down on Earth, Nora Park sat at a metal table in what had once been a library, now turned into a command post of chalk maps and hand radios. Her hands shook from exhaustion, but her mind would not rest. She stared at sketches of their defenses and saw a problem: the drones had switched from light tracking to sound and vibration mapping. The old tricks would fail soon. She remembered a museum pamphlet she had once read about ancient parades that used giant balloons and confetti, and how the moving air itself confused early machines. She turned that half-memory into a plan: balloons big enough to scatter sound reflections high in the air and confetti to make the skies shimmer and sing with false signals. She sent Javed to gather anything that could float. Javed worked like a man possessed, cutting plastic sheets from billboards, sewing them together with wire from old mattresses, filling them with helium scraped from medical tanks. His workshop smelled of rubber and oil and smoke, but the work lifted his heart. The children helped shredding tinfoil and candy wrappers into strips and stuffing them into leaf blowers to make what Nora called air cannons. The stupidest army in history was building new stupid weapons, and yet every piece mattered. Lena the runner watched them with awe. She had seen how the umbrellas had turned fear into courage, and now she saw how these new creations made people smile again when they tied bright balloons to rooftops and released rivers of foil into the air. The sun caught it and the city sparkled like a festival from another world. Hope looked strange, but it was still hope, she thought. When the drones came back, the balloons were ready. They drifted high like silver ghosts, each trailing a net of foil. The aliens fired and their sensors went blind again. The first wave of attacks missed the second wave too, but during the third pass, a drone's plasma bolt cut through the anchors and one of the big balloons snapped. Loose, it floated sideways, caught in the wind, and slammed into a hospital wing. The explosion tore windows and sent debris into the streets. Screams filled the air, and the laughter died. Nora reached the hospital first. She saw the nurses carrying wounded patients out under umbrellas that were now useless against falling glass. Her throat ached with guilt. The plan that was supposed to protect had harmed. Instead, she knelt beside the wreckage and whispered, "This is my fault." But a nurse touched her shoulder and said softly, "We are still alive. You made that happen." That night the city argued. Some shouted that these ideas were madness, that fighting with toys was suicide. Others shouted back that surrender would be death either way. The rain fell and lightning flickered over the rooftops. Commander Eris sent a broadcast across every human channel. His voice cold and sharp. "Surrender the devices. Surrender your false shields, and we will grant you peace." He said those who resist will be erased. Lena carried the recording of his message to Nora, who played it in the dark room where a single candle burned. When the message ended, silence hung heavy. Nora looked around at the faces waiting for her answer. She did not raise her voice. She spoke like someone telling a story. "We make mistakes, we fix them, we keep each other alive, we are not finished yet." And outside, as if the city itself had heard her, people opened umbrellas again. The foil shimmered under moonlight, and 100 kites lifted into the wind. Eris watched the sensors fill with confusion once more, and something inside him broke. The humans had turned their mourning into motion, their guilt into noise. He whispered to himself, "These people fight like fire, and the fire keeps learning even from ashes." The battle was not over, but the first cost had been paid, and humanity had chosen to keep walking through it, carrying their foolish, fragile, beautiful weapons toward whatever came next. The raid for the heart of AIM Commander. Eris was silent for a long time as his officers argued about recalibrations and sensor sweeps. The humans had turned the simplest tools into shields, and even worse, into lessons his machines could not read the noise of their hearts or the rhythm of their chaos, so he decided he would end the game in one clean strike. He ordered the targeting core from his flagship to be lowered to the planet, to a coastal tower near the sea, a structure of steel and crystal taller than anything the humans had built there. It would use atmospheric phase echoes to lock every human heat shape, every sound, every motion. No umbrella or balloon could hide once it began to pulse. He stood before his crew and said quietly, "We will burn their confusion away." Nora Park heard the rumor before the first beam of light crossed the clouds. The tower was guarded by drones and sealed gates, and the ground around it glowed with the heavy hum of alien energy. Her map of the city spread before her like a living thing, marked with water lines, tunnels, sewers, forgotten channels. She saw a thin path that ran under the coastal wall, a maintenance tunnel built decades ago for stormwater control, and her mind began to spin the way it always did when a plan grew out. Of desperation, she gathered Javed Khan and a handful of volunteers, men and women, who had already lost everything, and asked if they would go with her to steal the heart of the alien aim. No one laughed, no one hesitated. Javed worked all night building simple harnesses, ropes, and cutters. He filled bags with rubber insulation and painted every face with soot to hide reflections. They did not look like soldiers. They looked like ghosts preparing for one last walk through rain and mud and steel. Nora carried only a small radio and a packet of chalk dust to mark the turns. Lena begged to go with them. She said she was small. She could crawl through pipes and carry messages when others could not. Nora wanted to refuse, but when she saw the fierce light in the girl's eyes, she nodded. They entered the tunnel at dawn. The air, heavy with the smell of salt and metal water, dripped from the ceiling and echoed in long, hollow notes like the breath of the planet. The deeper they went, the louder. The hum from the tower became the walls shivered as the alien core powered up its sensors. Nora whispered instructions, each word barely a breath. They moved like shadows, each step slow and careful. One of the volunteers froze at the first intersection, his flashlight shaking in his hand, fear thick in his eyes. Nora touched his shoulder and said softly, "We go together. No one is left behind." The words steadied him, and they moved on. When they reached the chamber, they saw the heart of the alien system, a sphere of light suspended between magnet rails spinning with slow, deliberate power. It glowed like a captured sun, casting sharp white reflections that made every drop of water shine. Javed began to unbolt the clamps, while Lena crouched near the door listening for drones above her. She could hear the roar of the sea and the whine of alien turbines. She felt the weight of every heartbeat in her chest. Eris stood on the command bridge watching the live feed from the tower when the warning flashed, "Unauthorized entry detected." He leaned forward and saw tiny human figures moving like ants near the core. His first thought was disbelief. How had they reached this place? How could they know where to strike? He ordered the drones to converge, but communication lag made them slow. The humans were already working fast, their hands rough but sure. Javed disconnected the last clamp, and the sphere flickered, dimmed, and then fell into his arms, pulsing like a living thing. Nora called for retreat, her voice steady though her body trembled. They ran back through the tunnel, dragging the heavy core behind them. The alarms screamed through the corridors, and the seawater began to rise as if the planet itself were holding its breath. Lightning broke across the sky as they burst out of the tunnel onto the shore, carrying the sphere wrapped in canvas. The rain fell in sheets and the wind howled, but they were alive. The alien tower shuddered and went dark, its sensors blind. Eris slammed his fist against the console, his voice a low growl. How do they keep doing this? How do they turn every weakness into a path? Nora looked back once at the dark tower, then at Lena and Javed and the others, mud-streaked faces shining with rain. She whispered, almost to herself, "The heart of AIM belongs to us now." The others did not answer. They were too busy breathing, too busy, feeling the strange, quiet victory that comes when impossible things happen, and the night around them pulsed with the rhythm of rain and distant thunder, a rhythm that sounded almost like the heartbeat of Earth itself refusing to stop, the price of staying human. The storm rolled over the coast all night, and when the first gray light came, it revealed what victory had cost. The small group staggered back into the city, soaked, exhausted, and trembling with a kind of disbelief. The sphere they had stolen sat in the middle of an old workshop, glowing faintly under layers of wet cloth. It was the heart of the alien AIM, the weapon that could have ended the world, and now it beat softly like something that wanted to live. Nora Park stood before it, unable to speak for a long time. Javed Khan slumped against a wall, his hands blistered from carrying the thing through mud and water. Lena sat quietly beside him, her clothes torn, her hair dripping, but her eyes still bright with that stubborn light that belonged only to humans. They did not rest for long. The drones came sooner than they expected, drawn by the faint pulse of the core Javed pulled out a metal tub from under the workbench and filled it with ice from the broken refrigeration unit. He packed the glowing sphere inside, wrapped it in foil, and sealed it tight. The heat signature vanished under the cold metal for a moment, it seemed. They might have fooled the machines, but one drone found them anyway. It came screaming down the street like a shard of night, its searchlight slicing through rain. Nora shouted for everyone to run. Lena turned and grabbed the metal tub. She was small, quick, and she bolted toward the alley. The drone followed her beam, flaring white. The others shouted, but she did not stop. She ducked between two walls and threw the tub down a chute that led to the river. Then the beam caught her squarely in the chest. The light flashed once and she was gone. The world slowed to silence for a breath. Nora stumbled to the chute, staring into the rushing water below. She wanted to scream, but no sound came. Javed put a hand on her shoulder, his face pale. His voice rough. "We have to move," he said. "We have to make it count." They ran again, carrying what they could, and the city closed around them like a wounded animal trying to hide from the hunter. In orbit. Commander Eris watched the footage and felt a strange pull in his chest. He had seen many deaths, but none like this. The small human child had faced his drone with no weapon, no armor, only the will to protect something bigger than herself. He replayed the moment again and again, and with each viewing, the certainty of his mission cracked a little more. He began to wonder if conquest could ever work against beings who turned grief into defiance. When the humans finally reached the underground workshop that served as their main base, the people gathered around them. They saw Nora's face and understood what had happened. There was no need for words. They mourned quietly in the dim light. And when dawn came, they went back to work. No orders, no speeches, just work the way humans always did. Javed mounted the alien core on a makeshift scaffold of pipes and wires and connected it to the old generator he had rebuilt. The hum that filled the room was deep and steady, a new power rising from loss. The air felt warmer. The lights burned brighter. The machines began to move again. For the first time since the invasion, they had more than hope. They had energy. They had a way to fight back. But even as the city buzzed with reborn life, Nora could not shake the image of Lena falling, her small form. Swallowed by the light, she sat beside the generator and whispered her name over and over until the words became rhythm like prayer. She did not know if anyone heard, but she kept speaking because to stay human was to remember. The alien commander prepared a new weapon, a massive dreadnought entering Earth's orbit carrying what he called the pacifier array, a machine that could silence every human electronic device in one strike. He wanted to end the noise forever, yet when he gave the order to deploy something in him hesitated. He looked at the recordings of umbrellas and kites, of confetti storms and foolish bright colors, and the way the people of this strange world smiled even when surrounded by ruin. And he felt fear, the kind that no battle training could erase. Down below, Nora and Javed worked through the night, the hum of the stolen core growing stronger. They used its power to repair radios, to light shelters, to cook warm meals, and in every small act they found strength. The city glowed faintly under the storm clouds, not with alien fire, but with human hands building again. The people gathered around the tower that now held the alien heart. They did not know if it would save them. They only knew they would keep going, no matter what came, because that was the price of staying human, to carry the pain, the loss, the foolish hope, and to keep walking forward through rain and thunder until the very end. The sky full of mirrors. The dreadnought entered Earth's orbit, like a new moon, vast and terrible, its surface alive with blue veins of light, the pacifier array humming at its core. Commander Eris stood on his bridge, staring down at the planet that refused to kneel, his mind torn between admiration and frustration. Every calculation said the humans should have broken by now, yet every strike, every punishment only seemed to make them grow stronger. They were like the tide, always returning, no matter how many waves were crushed. He looked at the hollow place, where the targeting core had been, and thought of the small child who had died protecting it. And though he tried to silence it, something inside him whispered that she had not died in vain. Down on the planet, Nora Park watched the strange new star. In the sky, she knew it was no star. It was death waiting. She could feel the unease in the air. People were quieter now, more focused. There was no time for speeches, only for action. The alien core they had stolen pulsed with power deep inside the tower. Javed Khan and his crew of mechanics and tinkerers worked endlessly to turn that pulse into light, into heat, into movement, into survival. The city that had once been nothing but ruins now glittered faintly at night as rooftops filled with mirrors, broken glass, polished metal, and sheets of foil. Every surface that could reflect was lifted to the sky. They had learned that the alien sensors could not handle too many shifting reflections, and now they would turn the entire city into a single giant mirror, a living ocean of light. They cut mirrors from cars, from bathroom doors, from shattered screens. They polished them with cloth and rainwater and mounted them on sticks and rods and scaffolds. Old festival lasers were pointed upward, painting shapes into low clouds that drifted across the heavens like ghost constellations. Javed laughed softly as he worked, saying that if they were going to die, they would die making something beautiful. Nora said quietly, "We are not dying. We are showing them what it means to see." The signal to begin came from the mountain relays at dusk when the first shadow of the dreadnought passed across the sea. The city responded as one. Rooftops bloomed with mirrors and umbrellas and foiled the people, raised them high so that every flicker of lightning and every passing beam of the alien scouts scattered into 1,000 directions. The sky became a storm of false suns. Commander Aris ordered the pacifier array to charge its sensors, tried to find a stable reading, but the entire planet seemed to move. The readings were alive, dancing, laughing. He shouted for focus, but there was no focus. Only endless shifting. Javed climbed into his maintenance skiff and guided it down the flooded river, carrying the final piece of their plan, a bundle of cables and metal fans wrapped in foil and powered by the alien core they had stolen. His voice came through the radio, to Nora, calm, steady the way it always was when he was working. "If this works," he said, "they will see ghosts instead of us," she answered. "Then give them a whole world of ghosts." Javed laughed once and started the sequence. The fans unfolded above the river and began to spin, scattering reflections across the water and into the sky until it looked as if a second ocean had risen upside down. Aris felt the feedback surge through his systems. The pacifier array screamed as its calibration loop folded in on itself. The mirrors, the lights, the moving water all combined to create patterns his machines could not predict. The dreadnought's sensors went blind. Its own signals bounced back upon themselves, and the great ship shook under the weight of its own confusion on the planet below. The humans cheered, the sound rolling through streets and alleys like thunder. Nora stood on the tower holding the radio tight to her chest, whispering Lena's name as if she could send it through the static to the stars. Then came the final roar of failure inside the dreadnought as circuit after circuit melted under the stress. Aris watched the lights die around him. He felt no anger, only awe. He whispered to himself, the line that would echo in history. "Humanity is using the stupidest weapon I have ever seen, and it keeps working." The bridge crew stared at him in silence, unable to tell if he spoke in admiration or despair. Below the clouds, the people of Earth did not know they had already won. They only knew that for one more night they were alive. The city reflected the dawn's first light, 1,000 shards of brightness glimmering like tears across the rooftops. The sky full of mirrors carried the memory of every loss, every act of courage, every foolish human idea that somehow had turned into salvation. And as Nora looked toward the fading glow of the alien ship, she felt something like peace, not victory, not yet, but the beginning of it. Names in the rain. The dawn after the battle came slowly. The clouds hung low and red over the coast, and the people who had not slept stood on rooftops and bridges staring at the sky that no longer burned. The dreadnought drifted in silence, half blind, its weapons quiet, its lights fading like a dying storm. Commander Aris watched the readings collapse one after another. The great pacifier array dead, his sensors blind, his communications scrambled, the human mirrors still spinning across the surface below. The humans had turned his own machines against him, and in that moment he understood something that none of his war books had ever taught him. The measure of victory was not destruction. It was endurance, and these creatures had endured everything. On the ground, Nora Park stood on the balcony of the tower, her clothes soaked with rain and the wind whipping her hair around her face. The alien core still hummed beside her. It was weak, but steady like a heart that refused to stop. She looked across the city that had survived against all reason, and saw people lighting fires. To warm their hands, mothers holding children under umbrellas that no longer needed to hide them. Workers climbing rooftops to straighten mirrors that had fallen, every act small but full of stubborn meaning. Javed Khan climbed the stairs to meet her, his hands raw, his face streaked with oil and ash. He carried a small metal plate with Lena's name etched into it. She would have wanted it on the tower. He said quietly. Nora nodded and took the plate in her hands, feeling its weight like the memory of the girl who had run through fire so that others could live. In orbit, Eris faced the hardest decision of his life. His crew waited for orders, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. Some whispered that the humans would counterattack now, that the great dreadnought was crippled. Others begged him to retreat and regroup. He stood at the center of the bridge and looked at the world that had beaten him. Not with power, but with persistence. He opened a wide band channel and sent a message. To every human frequency, surrender the core, he said, and the fleet will withdraw peacefully. Nora heard his voice through the static, deep and weary like thunder in the distance. She pressed the transmitter and answered. Not with threats, not with victory speeches, but with names. She began to read every name she could remember. Lena Khan, Javed Khan, Abdul Rahman, Sarah Park, the teacher from the shelter who sang to the children, the old man who fixed the generators, the nurse who refused to leave, the hospital, the fisherman who guided rafts through flooded streets. She read them all one by one, her voice steady even as rain washed down her face. The signal spread from city to city, and soon other voices joined her across mountains and oceans. Across ruins and refugee camps, people spoke their names and the names of the lost. They filled the frequencies with human sound and memory, until the sky itself seemed to echo with it. Iris stood frozen as his translators struggled to process the noise, but it was not noise, it was rhythm. It was a map of everything his kind could never understand. He lowered his mandibles and whispered to his officers, "They are telling us they are still here." He gave the order to cease fire. Then he gave the order no conqueror had ever spoken in his fleet withdraw. The dreadnought turned slowly away from Earth, its engines burning a soft white glow as it left the orbit, and the fleet followed one by one, silent gray shapes slipping into the dark Ares. Watched the planet fade behind him and said to no one in particular, "We came to break them, and instead they taught us what it means to live." On Earth, the people saw the ships pulling back, and a sound rose through the cities. Not the roar of triumph, but the softer sound of relief, of life returning. Nora stood beside Javed on the tower, and together they fixed Lena's nameplate near the humming core. The rain fell gentle now, washing the soot from their faces. She whispered, "Thank you." And for the first time in many days, she allowed herself to cry. Javed looked at the horizon where the last alien light faded and said, "They called us foolish." He smiled, "But foolishness saved us." Nora laughed softly through her tears. Maybe being human means being foolish enough to never give up. When night came again, the city kept a few umbrellas open, not for war, but for memory. They hung from balconies and over gardens painted with bright colors and shiny foil that caught the moonlight like little stars. Children ran under them, chasing reflections, and laughter filled the air in a way it had not since before the sky burned across the planet. The phrase "Earthfire Lives" became a quiet greeting between strangers, a promise that as long as one human still breathed, the fire would never go out. And so the war ended, not with victory marches or alien surrender ceremonies, but with rain falling on steel and stone, and voices whispering names into the wind. Humanity had fought with the stupidest weapons ever seen: umbrellas, kites, mirrors, confetti, laughter, and love, and somehow they had won. Not because their tools were strong, but because their hearts refused to stop beating against the dark. The aliens left and the world healed slowly, piece by piece. The skies cleared and the sea calmed, and in every corner where the storm had once raged, someone looked up, smiled, and whispered to the rain, "We are still here. We are still human." The last light of Earthfire. The rain had ended, and the air was heavy with the scent of ash and salt. The clouds parted slowly, revealing a sky so wide and deep that it seemed to breathe with the planet itself. The cities were broken but alive, their ruins glowing faintly under the newborn sunlight, and everywhere people moved through the streets not as victims or soldiers, but as builders carrying bricks, wire, seeds, books, and laughter. Humanity had not won in the way wars are usually won. They had not crushed their enemy or planted flags. They had simply refused. To stop, they had faced the end of everything with umbrellas and mirrors and voices, and somehow that had been enough. Nora Park stood on the high tower that had once held the stolen alien core. Now silent and still, it was no longer a weapon, but a monument. The heart of AIM had become the heart of hope. The metal plate with Lena's name shone faintly in the light of morning, and Javed Khan stood beside her watching the sea below, where the first rays of sun turned the waves gold. He said softly, "Do you hear that?" And she listened. The sound came not from machines or engines, but from the city itself. Hammers striking nails. Children shouting, merchants calling from open stalls, all of it blending into one great living rhythm that felt like the heartbeat of the world. Across the planet, others did the same. They rebuilt the fields that had burned. They cleaned the rivers. They reconnected the broken lines that once carried light and power. They shared what little they had, because sharing had become their strongest weapon in the void between stars. Commander Aris watched from afar, his fleet scattered. Drifting without orders, he had disobeyed the high command, and he knew exile awaited. Yet when he closed his eyes, he saw umbrellas, shining in the rain, and kites dancing in wind, and he felt something he could not name, something like longing for the warmth he had never known. He recorded his final message before leaving orbit. It said to any who hear this, "Beware of the humans. They are small. They are fragile. They are the most dangerous life I have ever seen because they never stop loving." Back on Earth, Nora climbed down from the tower and walked into the streets. People waved to her, not as a hero, but as one of them. She stopped by the river where the water moved gently over the stones, and for the first time in years, she let herself rest. She took off her jacket and opened an umbrella, not to hide but to shade herself from the sun. Its fabric was torn and patched, with foil and stickers from long ago. Yet when the light hit it, the reflections danced across the surface of the water like tiny stars. She smiled and whispered, "Thank you to the sky," knowing that somewhere beyond those clouds, the universe was watching and remembering. The children gathered near the shore, chasing those reflections, laughing in voices that carried farther than any radio ever could. Javed sat nearby, tuning a small handmade radio, and the soft hum of music rose from it, the same tune the choir had once sung during the darkest nights, now carried by 1,000 new voices, stronger, clearer, full of promise. The city joined in, people singing from windows and rooftops, their voices weaving together like threads of light, binding the world back into one. The sky slowly darkened as the sun dipped below the horizon, and for a moment everything was quiet. Then a single mirror left on a rooftop caught the last beam of sunlight and sent it sweeping across the sea. The flash reached the tower, the mountains, the far side of the coast, and it seemed for that brief instant that Earth itself winked at the stars, saying, "We are still here. We will always be here." The light faded, but the warmth remained, and as night returned, the people looked up not in fear but in wonder, knowing that the age of silence had ended and the age of voices had begun. Nora closed the umbrella and looked around her at the faces of her people, at the scars that had become stories, at the ruins that were already turning into homes. She took a deep breath, feeling the pulse of life around her, and spoke softly, not to anyone, but to the world itself. "We lived through the fire, and we found the light, and now we keep it burning forever, and somewhere far beyond human sight, an alien fleet listened in silence, learning what no weapon could ever erase: the end."